Jackson Reed had never imagined that his first diplomatic assignment would involve learning to swim in zero gravity. The Crystal Springs Resort on Aquatica was renowned throughout the galaxy for its therapeutic pools, where visitors could float weightlessly in mineral-rich waters that sparkled like liquid diamonds. As a junior cultural attaché, he'd been sent here to establish relations with the aquatic Nereid species, but right now, he just wanted to relax after 3 days of tense negotiations. The resort's main pool chamber was a marvel of engineering, a vast crystalline dome that offered breathtaking views of Aquatica's twin moons while maintaining perfect atmospheric conditions. The zero-gravity field generator hummed softly overhead, creating pockets of weightlessness throughout the space. Jackson had changed into simple swim shorts, his lean but athletic frame showing the results of mandatory diplomatic corps fitness training. He eased into the nearest pool, sighing with relief as the warm, effervescent water embraced him. The sensation was incredible, like floating in liquid starlight. He closed his eyes and let himself drift, finally feeling some of the tension leave his shoulders. "Oh my cascading currents," came a melodious voice from nearby. "You're actually doing it." Jackson's eyes snapped open to find himself face to face with the most stunning being he'd ever encountered. Her skin was the color of deep ocean sapphires, with an almost crystalline quality that seemed to capture and refract the pool's ambient light. Long, flowing hair the color of sea foam moved around her as if she were underwater, despite being in the zero-gravity field. Most striking were her eyes, large, luminous, and the color of tropical lagoons. "I'm sorry." Jackson managed, suddenly very aware that he was nearly naked in front of this ethereal creature. "The human mating display," she exclaimed, her excitement causing small ripples of bioluminescence to dance across her skin. "I'm Zephyra, of the Coral Gardens clan. I've been studying your species' courtship rituals for months." Jackson blinked, confused. "Mating display? I was just swimming." Zephyra's expression shifted to one of delighted understanding. "Oh, you're being coy. Just like in the Earth broadcasts we intercept. The male pretends disinterest to make himself more desirable." She swam closer with fluid grace, her movements causing small whirlpools in the zero-gravity water. "I must say, your technique is flawless. The way you displayed your physical form, then acted vulnerable by closing your eyes, very sophisticated." "Wait, what?" Jackson treaded water, his face flushing red. "I wasn't." And now the adorable confusion act. Zephyra clapped her hands together, sending sparkles of light across the water's surface. "Oh, humans are even more complex than the research indicated. Don't worry, I've prepared extensively for this moment." Before Jackson could respond, Zephyra took a deep breath and began what could only be described as an interpretive dance in the water. Her movements were hypnotically beautiful but completely bewildering, involving elaborate spirals, graceful dives, and poses that seemed to defy the laws of physics even in zero gravity. "This is the traditional dance of aquatic seduction," she announced between movements. "I learned it from studying your underwater ballet performances. Am I doing it correctly?" Jackson watched in fascination and growing horror as other resort guests began to notice the spectacle. A group of Nereid elders floated nearby, their expressions ranging from amused to scandalized. Several other species had paused their own activities to stare. "Zephyra," Jackson said gently, trying not to hurt her feelings while also hoping to stop whatever was happening. "I think there might be some misunderstanding." "Oh." She stopped mid-twirl, her eyes brightening even further. "You want me to proceed to the next phase?" "Of course." To Jackson's amazement and terror, Zephyr began to glow. Not just the gentle bioluminescence he'd noticed before, but a radiant display that turned her into a living constellation. Patterns of light raced across her skin in complex geometries, and the water around her began to sparkle and shimmer in response. "This is the illumination of intent," she explained, her voice taking on a melodic quality that seemed to harmonize with the resort's ambient sounds. "In your romantic comedies, the female always reveals her true beauty at the crucial moment. Though I must admit, I didn't expect it to feel quite so intense." The light show was breathtaking, and Jackson found himself genuinely entranced despite his confusion. Zephyra was beautiful in a way that transcended species, and her obvious enthusiasm was oddly endearing. "Your pupils are dilating," she observed with satisfaction, swimming even closer. "And your heart rate has increased." "Excellent." The physiological responses matched the research perfectly. "Zephyra," Jackson said, his voice coming out huskier than intended, "what exactly do you think is happening here?" She tilted her head, sending cascades of luminous hair flowing around her shoulders. "Well, according to the Earth broadcasts, this is when the male admits his attraction and we engage in the traditional human bonding ritual of making out. Though I confess, I'm not entirely sure what that involves." The footage was rather unclear. Jackson couldn't help but laugh, the sound echoing off the crystalline walls. "You learned about human romance from our entertainment broadcasts?" "Of course. How else would I know?" Zephyra looked puzzled. "We don't have formal diplomatic relations yet, so I had to research on my own. I've watched hundreds of hours of your romantic films. They all follow the same basic pattern: the chance encounter, the misunderstanding, the grand gesture, and then the passionate reconciliation. And you think we're following that pattern now? Aren't we?" She swam in a slow circle around him, her bioluminescence creating a mesmerizing light trail in the water. "You appeared alone and brooding, clearly waiting for the right female to approach. I revealed myself, we had our meet cute, and now comes the part where we realize we're perfect for each other despite our differences." Jackson found himself genuinely charmed by her logic, flawed as it was. "And what happens in your version of romance?" Zephyra's glow softened to a warm, golden hue. "In Nereid culture, we believe that true compatibility reveals itself through shared resonance. When two beings are meant to be together, their bioelectric fields harmonize." She reached out tentatively, her fingertips barely grazing his arm. The moment their skin made contact, something extraordinary happened. The water around them erupted in a symphony of light and sensation. Jackson felt a tingling that seemed to race through his entire nervous system, while Zephyra gasped as waves of luminescence pulsed outward from where they touched. "Oh, my flowing tides," she whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. "That's not supposed to happen with off-worlders." Jackson stared at their joined hands, watching as patterns of blue and gold light danced between their fingers. "Is this normal for your species?" "With other Nereids, yes, but the resonance is usually much subtler." She looked up at him with an expression of genuine amazement. This is like nothing I've ever felt before." The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on Jackson. He'd come here for diplomatic relations and instead found himself in the middle of what might be the galaxy's most unusual meet-cute. But as he looked into Zephyra's luminous eyes, he realized something surprising: he didn't want the moment to end. "So," he said, unable to suppress a smile, "what comes next in your research?" Zephyra's answering smile was radiant. "Well, according to the Earth broadcasts, this is usually when the couple realizes they have more in common than they thought." She paused, tilting her head thoughtfully. "Though I suspect we might be writing our own script from here on out." As if in response to her words, the entire pool chamber began to glow with soft, harmonious light, reflecting their shared energy back at them in endless, beautiful patterns. Neither of them noticed the small crowd of fascinated onlookers that had gathered, or the fact that their simple misunderstanding was already being broadcast across Aquatica's communication networks. They were too busy discovering that sometimes the best connections happen when you least expect them, and that the universe has a sense of humor about bringing souls together, regardless of species. Marcus Vale had always believed that plants were more predictable than people. As a xenobotanist specializing in cross-species pollination, he found comfort in the logical patterns of botanical reproduction. That certainty was about to be thoroughly shattered in the most spectacular way possible. The living gardens of Redania Prime stretched before him like something from a fever dream. Massive trees with silver bark spiraled hundreds of feet into the canopy, their branches intertwining in impossible geometric patterns. Flowers the size of dinner plates pulsed with bioluminescent rhythms, while vines thick as his torso created living bridges between the towering flora. Everything here was alive in ways that defied Earth's understanding of plant behavior. Marcus adjusted his field pack and activated his recording device, documenting the incredible diversity around him. He'd been granted rare access to study the symbiotic relationships between Verdania's native species and the Sylvan people who lived among them. The Sylvans were rumored to be part plant themselves, though the scientific community was divided on whether this was literal or metaphorical. Fascinating, he murmured, kneeling beside a cluster of flowers that seemed to turn toward him like curious faces. The phototropic response is immediate, but they're not following light patterns. They're reacting to movement, maybe even pheromones. Actually, they're responding to your emotional state, came a melodious voice from above. Marcus looked up to see a figure descending from the canopy with impossible grace. She moved along the vine networks as if they were solid ground, her movements fluid and natural. As she drew closer, Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. She was humanoid in basic shape but clearly not human. Her skin had the texture and coloration of smooth bark, ranging from deep brown at her extremities to golden amber at her core. Instead of hair, she had trailing fronds that moved with their own life, shifting from deep green to burnished gold as they caught the dappled sunlight. Her eyes were the color of new leaves, and when she smiled, Marcus could see that her teeth had the pale white of fresh birch bark. "I'm Nixera," she said, dropping lightly to the ground beside him. "Keeper of the eastern groves. And you must be the human botanist who's come to study our reproduction cycles." Marcus scrambled to his feet, suddenly aware of how disheveled he must look after hours of trekking through the undergrowth. "Marcus Vale. I'm honored to meet you. I've read the preliminary reports about Sylvan flora integration, but seeing it in person is incredible." Nixera's fronds shimmered with what might have been pleasure. "The integration is more intimate than your reports suggest. We don't just live among the plants, Marcus. We are the plants, in many ways. Our life cycles are intertwined with theirs." As she spoke, Marcus noticed that the flowers around them were beginning to glow more brightly, their bioluminescent patterns becoming more complex and rapid. The air itself seemed to thicken with an almost electrical charge. "The garden is responding to you," Nixera observed, her voice taking on a tone that made Marcus's pulse quicken. "That's unusual. Normally it takes weeks for the flora to accept an off-worlder's presence." Marcus knelt again, pulling out his instruments to take readings. The electromagnetic signatures are off the charts. It's like the entire ecosystem is in a state of heightened arousal. He paused, realizing how that sounded. "I mean, heightened activity. Increased metabolic function." Nixera laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Oh, you were right the first time. The garden is definitely aroused. Question is, what's causing it?" She moved closer to examine his equipment, and Marcus caught a scent that was part pine forest, part blooming jasmine, and something else entirely unique. As she leaned over his shoulder, her fronds brushed against his neck, and he felt a jolt of sensation that had nothing to do with static electricity. "Your readings are fascinating," she murmured, apparently oblivious to the effect she was having on him. "Look at these patterns. They're remarkably similar to our own biorhythms during the flowering season." "Flowering season?" Marcus managed, trying to focus on science rather than the way her skin seemed to shimmer with an inner light. "It's our reproductive cycle," Nixera explained matter-of-factly. "Every few years, when conditions are perfect, we undergo a transformation. Our bodies produce specialized pollen, and we seek out compatible partners for genetic exchange. It's quite beautiful, actually." Marcus's scientific mind immediately began cataloging questions, but his hindbrain was focused on something else entirely. "And when does this season typically occur?" Nixera straightened, her expression suddenly uncertain. "Well, that's the thing. It's not supposed to happen for another 3 years. But ever since you arrived." She gestured around them, and Marcus saw that the entire grove was now pulsing with rhythmic light, like a vast heartbeat made visible. "You think I'm causing this?" Marcus asked, equal parts fascinated and terrified. I think we're causing this, Nyxera corrected, and as she spoke, her fronds began to shift color, deepening to rich golds and vibrant greens. The garden doesn't just respond to individual presence. It responds to compatibility, to potential for new growth and genetic diversity. A vine as thick as Marcus's waist suddenly erupted from the ground between them, its surface covered in flowers that bloomed and released clouds of glittering pollen. The air filled with the sweet, intoxicating scent, and Marcus felt his head spinning. Oh no, Nyxera breathed, her eyes wide with what looked like a mixture of wonder and panic. This is not good. Or maybe it's very good. I can't tell anymore. What's happening? Marcus asked, though part of him already suspected the answer. The garden thinks we're supposed to mate, Nyxera said bluntly. It's trying to facilitate reproduction between us. The pollen is an aphrodisiac designed to enhance fertility and lower inhibitions. Marcus felt his face flush, whether from the pollen or embarrassment, he couldn't tell. That's not how human reproduction works. I know that, Nyxera said, but her voice was breathier now, and Marcus noticed that her skin was beginning to glow with soft, golden light. But the garden doesn't understand the difference between human and sylvan biology. It just knows that we're compatible on some level. More vines burst from the earth around them, creating a living bower that enclosed them in a cocoon of blooming flowers. The air grew thick with pollen and the sweet scent of nectar, while bioluminescent patterns raced along the vine walls like neural networks firing. We need to get out of here, Marcus said, though his voice lacked conviction. The pollen was affecting him too, making everything seem softer, more dreamlike. And Nyxera looked absolutely radiant in the flower light, her skin glowing like burnished wood in candlelight. I don't think the garden is going to let us, Nyxera replied, gesturing to the walls of vines that surrounded them. It's decided we belong together, and it's very persistent. As if to emphasize her point, the flowers overhead began releasing a steady shower of golden pollen, while the vines beneath their feet grew thick and soft, forming a natural bed of moss and petals. This is insane, Marcus laughed, but he found himself moving closer to Nyxera rather than away. I came here to study plant reproduction, not participate in it. The universe has a sense of irony, Nyxera agreed, and then she was close enough that he could see the intricate patterns in her bark-like skin, the way her fronds moved with their own subtle life. Marcus, I need you to understand something. The garden isn't just responding to physical compatibility. It's responding to something deeper. What do you mean? Sylvan partnerships aren't just about reproduction. They're about finding someone whose life force complements your own, someone who can help you grow in ways you never imagined. Her hand, warm and slightly rough like tree bark, touched his face. The garden sees that potential in us. Marcus felt something shift inside him, a recognition that went beyond pollen-induced attraction. You feel it too. From the moment you arrived, she admitted. The way you look at the plants, the respect in your voice when you talk about them. You don't see them as specimens to be studied. You see them as living beings with their own beauty and purpose. The vines around them pulsed with brighter light, and Marcus realized that their emotional connection was feeding back into the garden's systems, creating a feedback loop of growing intensity. So what do we do? He asked, though part of him already knew the answer. Nyxera's smile was like sunrise through leaves. We stop fighting it. We let the garden show us what it sees. When their lips met, the entire grove exploded into light. Every flower, every vine, every tree for miles around burst into simultaneous bloom, creating a symphony of color and scent that could be seen from orbit. The pollen swirled around them like golden snow, while the living bower contracted around them, creating a private world of warmth and growing light. Marcus discovered that kissing someone who was part plant involved sensations he'd never imagined. There was the taste of spring rain and fresh earth, the feeling of life force flowing between them like sap rising in trees. Nyxera's skin grew warmer under his touch, her bioluminescence responding to his every caress. Is this what you meant by genetic exchange? He asked breathlessly, running his hands through her fronds and marveling at how they seemed to reach toward him. This is just the beginning, Nixra laughed, and her laughter made flowers bloom in the walls around them. The real exchange happens when we stop thinking and start feeling. When we let ourselves become part of the garden's rhythm. What followed was unlike anything in Marcus's experience. Their lovemaking was witnessed and celebrated by every living thing in the grove, the plants responding to their passion with displays of bioluminescence that turned the entire forest into a living light show. With each touch, each kiss, each moment of connection, the garden grew more vibrant, more alive. Hours later, they lay entwined on their bed of moss and flowers, their bodies still glowing with shared energy. The grove had settled into a gentle, rhythmic pulsing, like a vast organism breathing in contentment. The other Sylvans are going to be so jealous, Nixra murmured, tracing patterns on Marcus's chest with fingertips that left trails of golden light. No one's ever triggered a flowering season outside of the natural cycle. Marcus looked up at the canopy above them, where flowers continued to bloom in slow, steady waves. I have a feeling my research grant is going to be extended indefinitely. Oh, you're not going anywhere, Nixra said with a grin that showed her white bark teeth. The garden has claimed you now. You're part of the ecosystem. As if to prove her point, a small vine grew up from the moss beneath them, wrapping gently around Marcus's wrist like a living bracelet. Instead of feeling trapped, he felt welcomed, accepted into something larger and more beautiful than he'd ever imagined. I think I can live with that, he said, pulling Nixra closer as the garden sang softly around them, its ancient rhythm now including the beat of two hearts that had found their perfect match. Ethan Cross had performed in front of thousands, from intimate jazz clubs to massive stadium concerts, but nothing had prepared him for the harmonic amphitheater on Sonic Station. The venue was a marvel of acoustic engineering, carved from a single crystalline asteroid and suspended in the void between two pulsing neutron stars. Every surface was designed to amplify and modulate sound in ways that transcended mere physics. As he tuned his guitar backstage, Ethan could feel the station's resonance crystals humming in harmony with his instrument. The cultural exchange program had brought him here to share human music with the galaxy's most sonically advanced species, but he was beginning to suspect he was about to get more than he bargained for. Mr. Cross. A station technician approached, his translator device crackling with static. We've had an unusual request. One of the resonance wants to accompany you during your performance. Ethan looked up from his guitar, intrigued. The resonance were legendary throughout the galaxy for their ability to create music through pure emotional vibration, but they rarely collaborated with off-worlders. What kind of accompaniment? We're not entirely sure, the technician admitted. She just said she wanted to harmonize with the human soul song. Her name is Melodia, and she's, well, you'll see. Before Ethan could ask more questions, the lights dimmed and he was called to the stage. The amphitheater was packed with beings from dozens of species, all gathered to witness this unprecedented musical fusion. As he stepped into the spotlight, his guitar gleaming under the crystal formations above, Ethan felt the familiar thrill of performance energy. Good evening, Sonic Station, he said into the microphone, his voice carrying perfectly through the amphitheater's acoustic design. I'm honored to share some music from Earth with you tonight. Let's start with something gentle. He began with a soft acoustic piece, his fingers dancing across the strings in a melody that spoke of quiet moonlit nights and distant dreams. The audience was captivated, but Ethan noticed something unusual happening in the wings. A figure was moving in perfect synchronization with his music, and as she stepped into the light, Ethan nearly missed a chord. She was ethereal in a way that defied description. Her form seemed to shift between solid and translucent, as if she were made of crystallized sound itself. Her skin had an opalescent quality that reflected the amphitheater's lights in prismatic patterns, while her hair moved like visible music, flowing in waves that matched his guitar's rhythm. Most striking were her eyes, they pulsed with color that changed with each note he played. May I? She asked, her voice a perfect harmony with his current chord progression. Ethan nodded, too mesmerized to speak, and watched as Melodia stepped fully into the performance space. The moment she did, the entire amphitheater transformed. The resonance crystals began glowing brighter, and the air itself seemed to thicken with musical potential. She didn't sing in any conventional sense. Instead, her entire body became an instrument. As Ethan continued playing, Melodia began to emit sounds that complemented his guitar, low, thrumming bass notes that seemed to come from her core, delicate harmonies that shimmered from her fingertips, percussion rhythms that pulsed from her heartbeat. The effect was intoxicating. Ethan found himself playing with more passion and complexity than ever before, his music feeding off her responses and growing stronger. The audience was mesmerized, many swaying in perfect unison to their combined rhythm. "You feel it too," Melodia said during a brief instrumental break, her words somehow audible only to him despite the amphitheater full of listeners. "The resonance between us." Ethan's fingers never stopped moving on the strings, but his eyes locked with hers. "What is this? What's happening to us?" "In my species, we call it the Great Harmony," she replied, her body now glowing with soft, pulsing light that matched the tempo of his playing. "When two beings create music together so perfectly that their life forces synchronize. It's said to be the purest form of connection possible." As if responding to her words, the station's resonance crystals began vibrating with increasing intensity. The sound they created wasn't quite audible but could be felt in every bone, every cell. The audience was now completely entranced, some weeping openly at the beauty of the musical fusion. Ethan transitioned into a more upbeat piece, a rock anthem that had always gotten crowds moving on Earth. But with Melodia's ethereal accompaniment, it became something transcendent. Her body responded to the driving rhythm with colors that painted the air around them, while her voice created harmonies that seemed to come from another dimension entirely. "I've never felt anything like this," Ethan said during the bridge, his voice rough with emotion. "It's like you're reading my soul through the music." "Because I am," Melodia replied, and now she was close enough that he could see the musical notes that seemed to flow just beneath her translucent skin. "For my people, music isn't just art, it's how we communicate our deepest selves. And your music, Ethan, it speaks of longing and hope and beauty that I've never encountered before." The song built to its crescendo, and as it did, something unprecedented happened. The resonance crystals throughout the station began to overload, their harmonic frequencies pushed beyond their normal parameters. Reality itself seemed to bend around their music, creating visual distortions that turned the amphitheater into a kaleidoscope of sound and light. "The crystals can't handle the resonance we're creating," Melodia gasped, her form flickering between solid and pure energy. "We're generating frequencies that shouldn't be possible between two different species." But instead of stopping, Ethan found himself playing with even more intensity. The music had taken on a life of its own, demanding to be expressed regardless of the consequences. "Then let's give them something really impossible," he said with a grin that was equal parts reckless and exhilarated. He launched into an improvisational piece that drew from every genre he'd ever studied: blues, jazz, rock, classical, folk, while Melodia responded with sounds that spanned octaves no single instrument could reach. Together, they created a musical conversation that transcended language, species, and dimension. The effect on the audience was electric. Beings who had never moved to music before found themselves dancing. Species that had been enemies for centuries were embracing, united by the universal language of the performance. And throughout the station, the resonance crystals sang with frequencies that opened doorways to other realities, allowing glimpses of distant worlds and alternate possibilities. "We're not just making music," Melodia said, her entire being now blazing with harmonic energy. "We're rewriting the fundamental frequencies of this part of space." "Is that bad?" Ethan asked, though he couldn't bring himself to care about the answer. Playing with Melodia felt like coming alive for the first time. "It's never been done before," she replied. "We're creating something entirely new. A fusion of species that creates music beyond what either could achieve alone." As their final song reached its peak, the impossible happened. The resonance crystals throughout Sonic Station synchronized into a single, perfect chord that resonated not just through the asteroid but across the entire star system. Ships reported hearing the music across thousands of miles of vacuum, while planets light years away detected harmonic vibrations that shouldn't have been able to travel through space. When the last note faded, the amphitheater fell into stunned silence. Then, slowly, the audience began to applaud, not just with their hands, but with every means of expression their species possessed. Light beings flashed in synchronized patterns, gas creatures created visual displays of approval, and several crystalline species chimed in perfect harmony. Ethan set down his guitar with shaking hands, overwhelmed by what they'd accomplished. Melodia stood beside him, her form now stabilized but still glowing with residual harmonic energy. That was. He began, then found he had no words. The beginning, Melodia finished for him. What we just created, it's only the start of what's possible when two souls harmonize completely. She moved closer to him, and Ethan felt the air between them vibrate with musical potential. When she took his hand, he heard a chord so perfect it brought tears to his eyes. "My people have a saying," Melodia whispered, her voice now a private melody meant only for him. "When the great harmony is achieved, two become one song that echoes through eternity. And if I want to keep singing that song?" Ethan asked, though he already knew his answer. Her smile was like visible music, beautiful and complex and full of promise. "Then we keep making music together. Forever." As they kissed for the first time, the station's crystals sang softly in the background, a gentle harmony that seemed to bless their union. Around them, the audience continued their celebration, but Ethan and Melodia were lost in their own private concert, a duet of hearts that would indeed echo through eternity. Later, as reports of their performance spread across the galaxy, musicologists would study the phenomenon for decades. The sonic station incident became legendary, inspiring countless other interspecies collaborations and fundamentally changing how the galaxy understood the power of music to unite different forms of life. But for Ethan and Melodia, the science mattered less than the simple truth they discovered, that love, like music, is a universal language that transcends all boundaries. Their continued performances together would go on to heal diplomatic rifts, inspire new forms of artistic expression, and prove that some harmonies are so perfect they can literally reshape reality. And in the quiet moments between concerts, when they would practice together in private, the resonance crystals would hum softly in contentment, as if the station itself had learned to love the music they created together. Epilogue: The Growing Symphony. Word of these three extraordinary encounters spread quickly through galactic communication networks. The story of Jackson and Zephyra's luminous romance in the Crystal Springs Resort became a sensation on a dozen worlds. Marcus and Nixera's botanical passion had literally changed the ecosystem of an entire planet, creating new species of hybrid plants that bloomed with unprecedented beauty. And Ethan and Melodia's musical fusion had introduced concepts of harmonic resonance that advanced acoustic science by centuries. But perhaps more importantly, their stories had begun to change how the galaxy viewed interspecies relationships. What had once been considered impossible, or at best, highly improbable, was now being recognized as not just possible, but potentially transformative. Love, it seemed, was indeed a universal force, capable of bridging any gap and creating beauty beyond imagination. And as more species began to openly explore these connections, the galaxy itself began to sing with new harmonies, each relationship adding its own unique note to the growing symphony of unity. The age of cosmic romance had officially begun.